Hi, welcome back to another episode of Special Interview. My name is Manuel Rapalo. Joining us today, we have Ahmed Hussein, who is a member of the Bahraini opposition and also a political activist here in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the show. Thanks very much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. Thank you.
Let's go ahead and jump right in. I do want to go ahead and talk about the situation in Bahrain. But if we could just backtrack a little bit and talk a little bit about the Arab Spring in general. It seems as though the movement itself has progressed quite a bit. It's been several months now since December, and the movement itself has moved away, not just from Tunisia and Egypt and even Libya, where there's sort of a stagnation. The Gulf states are now, and the entire Middle East region seems to be still very much aware of the situation. I'm wondering, on your opinion, is this movement fueled by the same movement that we saw in Tunisia?
Oh yeah, well, the set of revolutions that are now described and known as the Arab Spring, those are pretty much all inevitable in light of the repression, oppression, lack of participation in basically self-determination of one's nation and country, and the fate of one's country, and the inequality in the distribution of wealth throughout the Arab world made it inevitable for revolutions to break out. Throughout the entire Arab world, with the exception of perhaps Lebanon and definitely Iraq, since they're the only two democracies.
So do you feel as though what's going on in the Gulf right now, Yemen and Bahrain, are very much fueled by that same movement, that same sentiment?
I do believe that they were able to rub off a certain amount of the courage from Tunisia and Egypt and the success that was seen therein, but it was definitely an inevitable revolution that especially on Bahrain's part. Bahrain has been having a revolution for almost every single decade for a very long time.
Give us a little bit of a background on Bahrain, because I know that you've been working. We've discussed in the past. You've been working pretty fervently since even before the revolution. So can you give us a little bit of a background analysis of what's taking place in Bahrain up until now?
That's right. I mean, I've been calling for something of that sort for years now, and the problem in Bahrain and the status quo in Bahrain, much very differently to Libya, Egypt, and the other North African countries that have revolted. The dictatorship in Bahrain is a dictatorship that is Saudi imported from the deserts of Najd 235 years ago. There are several factors that made revolt at that part of the world inevitable. Economic, social, and political. Political in that Bahrainis do not have a right of self-determination because there is an absolute monarchy and a royal dictatorship with a self-appointed king who wrote a constitution that serves the interests of one tribe at the expense of the entire population, and especially the Shiite Muslims. You got the economic factors. The economic factors, there's an basically there is a grave inequality in the distribution of wealth and national resources. Free speech. We've seen Ayat al-Karmazi, a 20-year-old who was locked up for simply reciting a poem, and this just highlights the amount of repression and censorship that the Bahrainis have been suffering from ever since 235 years ago.
So what interest does Saudi Arabia have in Bahrain specifically? And the reason I ask is emergency law was lifted in June in Bahrain. So it's been over a month since they lifted emergency law, but we're still seeing a Saudi presence there. Why is that? Why do we still see them on the ground?
Of course, this lifting off the emergency law was just a pseudo appeasement to the Western world, and to have people easing down with the vehement criticisms of the Bahraini dictatorship. Now, Saudi Arabia's interests are primarily that of its own. They fear that if anything happens in Bahrain, that would spread quickly to Saudi Arabia. Now, although Saudi Arabia is a majority Sunni country, but the Shia Muslims there are about 35%, 30 to 35%. And all the oil lies under their feet, and what they fear is that being the Arab world's #1 dictatorship and the host to all dictators, we clearly saw Ben Ali, Hosni Mubarak, the Yemeni dictator Ali Abdullah Saleh, all went to Saudi Arabia and Riyadh, and Jeddah just, as a shelter. Saudi, in effect, became a shelter for all Arab dictators. Its interests, as we clearly saw by the Saudi invasion of Bahrain, and as well as the Saudi-induced request for the Jordanian dictatorship and the Moroccan dictatorship to join the Persian Gulf Council, And their interests are primarily those of its own, and they've also got sectarian interests to further their Wahhabi nefarious agendas.
Could you elaborate a little bit on the idea that the Saudi is the host, is kind of the sponsor of dictatorships?
Sure thing. Well, about a week ago, I believe it was, or even less, the Jordanian dictator Abdullah II had met with the other Saudi dictator and monarch of Saudi, Abdullah, and he pledged support of $400 million to them. $400 million is a grant for nothing, basically. And of course, it wasn't for nothing. It was to consolidate loyalty to to Saudi Arabia and to ensure that they maintain their stronghold there and ruling Jordan with an iron fist, as well as Morocco. Thankfully, their efforts with Morocco did not really get much. I mean, even though Morocco does have an element of autocracy with Mohammed VI, but it's relatively better than the Persian Gulf nations. But other than that, we've seen how Saudi hosted each and every one of the dictators. As a matter of fact, the friction between Saudi-U.S. The friction between Saudi and the U.S. vested in the fact that President Barack Obama had supported the Egyptian revolution, and he supported the Egyptian pro-democracy revolutionaries in a transformation from a dictatorship to a democracy. And Saudi had implored and beseeched and begged the U.S. to take a very different stance, but the U.S. thankfully stayed on the right side of history, and President Barack Obama took a very commendable stance in supporting the revolution.
On that note, let me ask you, why do you suppose the United States took that stance in Egypt and supported the people's movement, and from what it seems like they're doing the same in Libya now. They're supporting the people's movement in response to Gaddafi's crackdown on protesters, but are remaining mainly silent when it comes to Bahrain, when it comes to Saudi Arabia, when it comes to Yemen even.
All right. Well, first of all, when it comes to Egypt, Egypt is a much larger country. And we've seen, and thus has a much larger population. So when 1 million people march to Tahrir Square, it really makes it very difficult to not respond to that and to not have a view that correlates to the people of Egypt. You are right, yes, there is an inconsistency, unfortunately, on President Barack Obama's part, and he's not so much clinging on to the right side of history when it comes to Bahrain as of yet, and he has not taken stances that are anywhere near proportional as of yet, especially to the will of the Bahraini people. And I think his encouragement for a sham dialogue between the murderous dictatorship and Bahrain is an inconsistency between his policy with terrorists like Osama bin Laden and with the terrorist dictatorship of Bahrain that has murdered and threatened rape and threatened its citizens, in effect, with rape and other heinous crimes. But I believe that the issue of Bahrain is a lot more complex, and that it's pretty much U.S. values versus the desires of an ally.
So what sets it aside? What sets Bahrain aside? Is it that strategic partnership that the United States?
It's the strategic partnership and the Fifth Fleet. Now, the American Fifth Fleet is centered in Bahrain, although it wouldn't be much of a problem to relocate it to elsewhere, to a country that does not abuse human rights and violate human rights with such a heinous magnitude. But I think that's what truly sort of complicates the situation with Bahrain, although it is a matter of principle, and we'd sincerely hope that Barack Obama would take a proportional stance to that which he took with the people of Egypt and the people of Tunisia and Libya, because the people of Bahrain are suffering a lot more heinously than even Syria, given the population and the crimes that were committed against them. I mean, in Bahrain, for every 1,000 citizens, 2 are detained, persecuted, and are tortured in jail.
With those sort of per capita statistics, it really makes you wonder like as an observer, what specific things have you noticed that might be hindering progress on the United States' part to really take a stand against that?
2 words: Saudi Arabia. It's the Saudi dictatorship that is immensely pressurizing the U.S. administration to sort of take a different stance with promises that they never intend to honor, and an illegitimate involvement in the affairs of the Bahraini people and the Bahraini government. And I think the U.S. is keeping patient as of yet, perhaps maybe because they wouldn't want a government that might be pegged or would be a proxy to Iran. But the truth of the matter is, and even the U.S. ambassador to Bahrain had said that in 2008 and confirmed it in 2010 time and again, there is absolutely no ties whatsoever between the Iranian government and the Bahraini people. This is a pro-democracy movement that is for a republic that affords equality, human dignity, liberty, and justice to all citizens. And hopefully when we can consolidate that and convey that fact to the international community and especially the United States, I think that we can make progress, and the U.S. would take a hopefully very different stance that is proportional with the desire.
So you feel that those are the aims of the movement in Bahrain specifically?
Absolutely.
And where do they stand on that now? How do you feel what's the progress being made by Bahrainis in that aim?
Well, Bahrainis are the revolutionaries are protesting on a daily basis. They're attempting time and again, and their efforts are obviously colossal, given the size of the population and the amount of people. They're doing a great job, and they just need to persist until they get what they deserve and their rights ultimately.
And I know that this would be more of a broad question, kind of difficult to ask. Hopefully not. But how do we measure success in this instant? What would be a successful outcome? And could Bahrain be successful without the intervention of the West? The United States is fully committed, apparently, with other NATO allies in Libya, and we're still seeing stagnation there with Gaddafi. But do you think we're going to see a similar outcome in Bahrain if we don't see Western interference?
Well, in Bahrain, initially, of course, the demand was to have a constitutional monarchy, but after the regime had committed all sorts of heinous crimes, the outright majority of Bahrainis right now are pursuing a presidential constitutional republic, and that is what I ultimately call success. Now, as to realistically speaking, can they achieve that success without the West? Probably not. They need an ally. They need an ally to achieve success, given the demographics of the country. Don't forget, Bahrain is a country. The natives in Bahrain are less than 1 million. And then you got the army, and the security sector is made up of Arab mercenaries from Jordan, Palestine, Syria, Yemen, and other Arab mercenaries. And the police force is made up of Asian nationals. Now, as proven paramount, the military and the police and security services across the spectrum are integral to the success of any revolution. And the West needs to interfere, most definitely, and I mean, realistically speaking, Bahrain only has the West on one hand or Iran on the other. And absent an interference from either entities, success would be very difficult to achieve, although possible, but would probably take a lot longer time to do so.
Now, I can't help but draw parallels between each one of these cases. Bahrain, Yemen, Libya, Egypt. What really sets Bahrain aside? Because you were talking about the difference in demographics, the demographic makeup of your military, of the government, and of the people.
That's
Is
right.
there a question of? Do you think it's a question of trust? Is that what it boils down to? That the military, the police forces are not really on the sides of the people? Or
Well, the military, both the military and the police force is made of non-Bahraini mercenaries, and that is the #1 chief problem. And the fact of the matter is, there is no Shia Muslim who is a part of the military or police force when the country is an absolute majority of about 77% Shia Muslim. So therefore, the army's desires, and the army is next to never going to stand with the people. But again, mercenaries are not trustworthy, and that's one thing that the Al Khalifa dictatorship knows for sure and certainly. That is why the Al Khalifa dictatorship, as an illegitimate dictatorship, of course, had allowed for a Saudi invasion and occupation of Bahrain. Now, the Saudi occupation of Bahrain came under the false guise of an invitation, but it was an occupation and an invasion that was decided by the Saudi dictatorship, and it went through simply to confirm the fact that mercenaries are not trustworthy.
now the presence in Bahrain by Saudi troops, it's still very much an issue, correct?
Absolutely, it is an invasion under international law, UN regulations, you name it.
So how does the relationship change between, and let me rephrase that a little bit. Do you think that this movement is going to be, and again I'm using the term loosely, successful?
Yeah.
And if it is, how are those relationships going to change? The relationship between the new government, the new regime in Bahrain, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the new regime in Bahrain, and the relationship that it would have with Western powers, the United States, NATO allies.
All right. With Saudi, unless there is a total change in the regime in Saudi Arabia and a complete replacement of the Saudi dictatorship, there cannot be any credible relations between Bahrain and Saudi, especially not after the invasion. Now, we've clearly seen that the Wahhabi extremist clerical institution, and the Al Saud household, who in effect are two faces of the same currency, those have a very sectarian agenda that is malign and and has proven to be very very heinous in its directions. Like, for example, take Iraq. They send suicide bombers on an almost conventional basis to Iraq, just to kill people, to systematically murder Shiite Muslims. Likewise, in Lebanon, the Taif Agreement. The Taif Agreement, Lebanon is a country that is 88% non-Sunni Muslim, but they deliberately, sort of constrained power with a premiership to one of the smallest minority sects in Lebanon. Therefore, we can clearly see that in so long as the Wahhabi clerical institution and their extremism and the Al Saud household's presence and their political extremism exist, there can be no credible relations with Saudi. But on the other hand, with the United States, I think that the people of Bahrain regard the United States as an ally, despite the fact, and are, well, right now they're very dismayed, I think, and disappointed. There's a great sense of disappointment because Bahrain's position right now reminds Bahrainis of the American Revolutionary War, whereby that the tyranny and the hegemonic nature of the British Crown is symmetrical to that of Saudi's. Saudi's role right now is symmetrical to Britain's, and Bahrain's revolution is symmetrical to the U.S.'s back in 1783 and 1776. So what the people want and what they yearn for is for an American administration to honor the values, principles, ethics, and morals of the founding fathers of the United States and to act in line with them, and to afford and to support through political and military means, including but not limited to the U.S. Fifth Fleet, support that would be geared towards instating a presidential republic, a presidential constitutional republic in Bahrain, and I think as soon as the new Bahraini regime comes, it would have a very healthy relationship with the West. This is based on mutual benefits and mutual respect.
See, I think there's something missing. I'm seeing two ends of one spectrum. I'm seeing a humanitarian crisis in Bahrain,
Yeah.
and I'm seeing a strategic partnership that the United States has with the monarchy. But if the United States is allied with Bahrain, why is it not taking the side of the people? What's missing there? We were talking about the demographics and the percentage of the population that was actually out on the streets protesting. I'm not just talking about the people that have confirmed that they're part of the opposition or confirmed that they're against the monarchy. I'm talking about the people that are out demonstrating on the streets, marching, saying, we're against this regime. These are pictures that are clearly seen in the United States. Why is the United States government not taking the side of the Bahraini people?
Basically, again, Saudi Arabia's malign role, whether it be from the extremist political end of Al Saud's, the Al Saud dictatorship, or the extremist Wahhabi clerical institution, religiously speaking, they've conversed together to misrepresent the situation and status quo in Bahrain as being a sectarian one, when clearly it's not, because Sunni, Shiites, people from across all the political spectrum have voiced demands for a downfall of the regime. Now, Saudi Arabia and the Saudi monarchs is in effect begging the United States to stick to what they believe is good for the people, and that is obviously furthering their dictatorships at the expense of the people's freedoms, national wealth, and economic progress. Again, I sincerely hope that the U.S. would very soon begin to change its policy towards Bahrain because, well, Bahrain is yearning for change. Bahrain is yearning for a democracy, for liberty, for human dignity, justice, and equality that every human being deserves.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's back up a little bit. Let's talk about contingency.
Mm-hmm.
You've been working pretty hard on this on the side of the Bahrainis, pretty hard on the movement.
Yeah.
What's the demographic makeup of a sort of transitional government that would be coming into place? That's something that I haven't really heard about, and I don't think people hear any leadership on the part of the opposition. I haven't really heard any names thrown out or what sort of parties are in place to start debating once the regime is taken down, if the regime is taken down rather. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about any sort of transitional movement that you know of that's on the ground in Bahrain.
All right. Well, as we've clearly seen right now from this opposition movement in Bahrain, I think that the new government, after the overthrow of the Al Khalifa dictatorship, hopefully, would be proportional to what it is, or very similar to the alliance that is formed right now, i.e., an alliance that is formed by Shia Muslims, Sunni Muslims, by people of different political philosophies, such as capitalists, socialists, secularists, non-secularists, theocrats. I think that the entire population is going to have to come together and compromise and broker a deal that is satisfactory to all Bahrainis. And I think that they're very capable of doing that. And their cooperation ever since the February 14th, 2011 revolution in Bahrain is a prime example of unity and an amalgamated stance between the Shia Muslims, Sunni Muslims, secularists, theocrats, and all politicians.
So where do you think they're falling short with the unity movement? Do you think that because obviously we're seeing very strong rhetoric from the side of the Saudis toward America, and in the sense that they're lobbying the American officials, and to have that policy toward Bahrain. Do you think that maybe that's a flaw or one of the flaws of the transitional movement, that they're not being adamant enough in speaking to American officials? I'm speaking about the Bahraini people themselves. Any sort of leadership on the people's part, are they maybe not having enough rhetoric towards the American government?
Absolutely. I think that is lobbying on their part, and shortage of lobbying rather, lack thereof, is a fundamental problem on their part. They need to do exactly what they're doing. They need to reciprocate all of whatever the dictatorship is doing, but just tell the truth. Because the fact of the matter is, Bahrain and the Bahraini opposition and the outright majority of Bahrain, be them Shia Muslims, be they Shia Muslims, Sunni Muslims, or any other minority, what they yearn for and demand so very fervently is to have a life that is just like the people of the United States, and they want to relate to the people of the United States, and they need to convey that. The people of Bahrain do not want to be slaves or stooges or proxies or agents to any foreign entity, whether it is from the east, the west, north, or south. They just want to be independent, and they want equality and justice for all people of Bahrain, irrespective of whatever walk of life or religion they subscribe to.
Okay. I need you to predict the future for me a little bit here. I don't want to draw too close of a parallel between Bahrain and Yemen, but are we seeing the same division that we're seeing in Yemen amongst the people in Bahrain? As in, are we already seeing the formation of divisive parties? Are we already seeing a division in ideology of what they want, or do you feel as though there really is a strong unified movement that would probably stick, if you will?
All right. Well, primarily the problem in Yemen, the chief problem in Yemen, is the fact that basically most Southerners want to part away from those who are in North Yemen and Northern Yemen, or anyone that in effect is an ally of dictator Ali Abdullah Saleh. So, and tribalism is really the best word to describe the conundrum in Yemen. Now, in my personal opinion, and obviously this is a matter that I leave to all Yemenis to decide for themselves and to determine for themselves. But in my opinion, I think that any division in Yemen was due to Ali Abdullah Saleh's tyranny and hegemonic nature. And I think that once they get a democracy, they can most probably broker a deal that is satisfactory to all Yemenis. But in Bahrain, we've clearly seen, I mean, throughout the course of 235 years, the Al Khalifa dictatorship has proven that it not only it obviously derives its power through illegitimate means.
And I'm really sorry to cut you off. We've unfortunately run out of time. I told you, 30 minutes just is not enough these days for these sort of conversations. I want to thank our guest, Ahmed Abdul Hussein, for joining us today. And please join us again for another episode of Special Interview. Again, my name is Manuel Rapalo. Have a wonderful day.